working on this story, William O'Neill gave the Oreo cookie its famous design. Have you ever wondered where flavors go when they die? Neither have I, but Ben and Jerry's knows. On the grounds of the Ben and Jerry's headquarters in Vermont is a flavor graveyard, where flavors of their famous ice cream that were discontinued have been laid to rest, with tombstones and all. Are there any flavors among these that you are mourning? It's only about the sweet, though. We must enjoy the savory, too. Like tacos. Do you love tacos? Yes? Well, do you love tacos enough to make it your epitaph on your grave? Los Angeles food critic Jonathan Gold did, writing "Tacos Forever" on his tombstone here at Hollywood Forever Cemetery. If not tacos, maybe hot dogs are more your flavor. And here in America, few names conjure up images of the classic American hot dog more than Oscar Mayer. The man whose name has become synonymous with wieners founded his company here in Chicago in 1883, and now rests at this site, Rosa Cemetery. The success of that name recognition is owed in no small part to a catchy tune and distinctive marketing vehicle, the Wienermobile, which adorns this grave in Calumet Park Cemetery in Indiana. Here rests a man known as Little Oscar. George Molchan was the spokesperson for Oscar Mayer for nearly 4 decades, traveling the country in the Wienermobile to promote Oscar Mayer products. At his funeral, the Wienermobile was parked nearby, and mourners broke into a rendition of "I Wish I Were an Oscar Mayer Wiener." Have you ever eaten something that was so good, you asked if you could get the recipe, and the response was, "Over my dead body"? Well, these next masters of their culinary craft took that literally, by putting their favorite recipes right on their tombstones. In Brooklyn's historic Greenwood Cemetery, you'll find Mary Miller Dawson's grave and her recipe for Spritz cookies, a kind of buttery sugar cookie, particularly popular around Christmas time, and notable for their decorative shapes. Christmas cookies have the added ingredient of nostalgia baked into them, and so it's no surprise to find another Christmas cookie recipe on the stone. At Cascade Protestant Cemetery in Iowa, Maxine Menster's family shared one of her Christmas traditions with the world, etching their favorite recipe for her Christmas cookies onto her tombstone. In Utah's Logan Cemetery, we find another person who loved to bring her family together through good food. Wanting something on her stone that was meaningful to her, Catherine Andrews decided to have her famous fudge recipe engraved into her stone. She would be delighted to know that thanks to the internet and social media, people from all over the world have indeed tried her fudge. In recent years, it's become a popular trend on social media to make and share tombstone recipes. This is some really good tombstone fudge. While I continue to enjoy this, why don't you enjoy some more of those unique and unusual tombstones, monuments, and epitaphs? Those who know me know that I love stained glass. This is the first time I've ever seen a headstone made of stained glass. Sometimes a good laugh can be cathartic in the face of death, and I think Janet Girolamo knew that. If you guessed this was a Utah grave, you're wrong. Santa Monica, actually. If you find yourself wandering Green Mount Cemetery in Baltimore, you might just stumble onto a tombstone with a Ouija board carved into it. That's because the man who invented it in 1890 rests under it, Elijah Bond. The board is touted as a means of communication with the spirit world. So while we're here, let's pull out our planchette and pose a question. Mr. Bond, is it pronounced Ouija or Ouija? That's not help at all. In Brooklyn's historic Greenwood Cemetery is this curious sight. It is known as the Grave of Secrets, so named because it features a slot into which visitors can slip their darkest, deepest secrets, written on sheets of paper.
The warmer it is, the better.
What was my secret? I'll take that one to the grave.
78 to 80.
Hey, I hear something coming from within the Grave of Secrets. It sounds like music.
This salinity is not super specific.
Leslie
You can get
Nielsen
away
was a
with
master of comedy.
quite a bit more, quite a bit less.
Like the Naked Gun series
still
and
work.
Airplane. He continued to make us laugh right up until the end. But Leslie ensured the laughs wouldn't die with him, leaving us one last joke here on his grave. It's quite common to see the letters R.I.P. on a grave marker. Rest in peace, right? Well, usually. But Mr. Nielsen's epitaph, "Let it rip," means something entirely different. Throughout his later life, he was known for his love of a good fart joke. He even carried a little fart machine around with him wherever he went, so he could let one rip whenever it was most comedically expedient.
It's just a prop for you to airplane when I have too much fun with it. Carry it around. Yeah, okay.
This unique urn in the Abbey of the Psalms at Hollywood Forever Cemetery belongs to actor John Paragon. If you grew up watching Pee-wee's Playhouse in the 80s and 90s, you'll recognize this as an exact replica of the Genie box of John B. the Genie, who would grant Pee-wee one wish per day. After John passed away in 2021, he was cremated, his ashes held for a time by Elvira, until they were placed in this urn. So when you come pay your respects to John, make a wish. Perhaps John B. will make it come true.
Wish? Did somebody say wish?
Nude statuary is surprisingly commonplace in cemeteries around the world, particularly in Europe and the forest lawns in California.
Motion sick.
Here is one in Macedon Cemetery in Australia that stands out among the rest. This beautiful sculpture is called Asleep. Lawrence Matheson had been a patron of the artist Peter Schipperheim during his life. After he passed, Lawrence's wife commissioned Peter to carve this sculpture to adorn his grave. This monument at Mount Carmel in the Chicago area features a beautiful sculpture of the DeSalvo family. But that's not what makes this unique. This unusual grave marker, with considerable effort, actually rotates on its base. It's known as the spinning grave. Resting in St. Peter's Churchyard in Heysham, England, is Sarah Hannah Jones. All we know about her is what her epitaph states, that she was a poet, philosopher, and failure. Something like that on my tombstone. If you grew up in the 80s, you might just call yourself a fan of Pac-Man. But I'd wager that Michael Pac-Man Luther was a bigger fan than you. The superfan loved Pac-Man so much, his grave is a recreation of a classic Pac-Man arcade game. At Lone Fir Cemetery in Oregon is this curious marker. This unrecorded and unidentified burial was discovered while digging another grave. A family had purchased 3 adjacent graves in this plot, only to discover that one of them was already occupied. Rather than disturb the grave, new owners moved one plot south, and since the cemetery was unable to identify the remains here, they installed a marker for this random person. Powerful words from a gay Vietnam veteran. The gay community has almost never seen itself reflected in public monuments, particularly funerary monuments. So in 2002, an artist named Patricia Cronin created America's first funerary monument to same-sex marriage, titled Memorial to a Marriage. The sculpture features the artist and her now wife, and was created in a time when same-sex marriage was still illegal in the United States. Originally carved in marble, this more robust bronze version now marks the future graves of Cronin and her wife, here at Woodlawn Cemetery in the Bronx, New York. What may be unusual for one culture may be perfectly normal, even sacred for another. For some Native American tribes, from the Great Plains all the way to Alaska, there is the unique tradition of building a small house over the grave of the departed. Known as a grave house or spirit house, they serve as a temporary home for the spirit of the departed. The structures are typically allowed to decay naturally, as the house is only temporary, until the spirit can move on in their journey to the afterlife. Legendary actor Will Sampson, famous for his role in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, was a member of the Muskogee Nation, and his grave here in Oklahoma features a spirit house. In a similar spirit as these Native American spirit houses are dollhouse graves, usually built by parents in mourning for a child who had died. One such example can be found here in Oakwood Cemetery in Lanett, Alabama. Little Nadine Earls wanted a dollhouse for Christmas, but the young girl fell ill and died just before Christmas. Her grief-stricken parents fulfilled her wish in the form of this dollhouse over her grave, in which she will live forever. Peek through the window and you'll catch a glimpse of the grave of little Nadine Earls, a grave attended by her doll collection and other toys. In Arlington, Indiana, we pay a visit to the rural Arlington East Hill Cemetery to find another of these most melancholy of monuments, the dollhouse grave of Lova Klein. The young girl was born with a crippling neurological illness. During her short life, she loved the dollhouse her father had built for her. After her death at age 6, her father had the dollhouse placed next to her grave, so she could see it always, as well as her toys there. Just 30 minutes away, in Connorsville City Cemetery, is a similar site. The story of little Vivian May Allison echoes that of Nadine Earls. Her parents had been building a dollhouse for Christmas, but young Vivian fell ill and died before they could give it to her. She was just 5. In their grief, they had the dollhouse placed over her grave, filled with her favorite toys. Vivian's parents took care of the dollhouse grave until their deaths, after which it gradually fell into disrepair. Volunteers and citizens of Connorsville stepped in and repaired and refurbished the dollhouse in the 1990s and helped maintain it to this day.
It's not easy being the one everyone counts on to keep your operation running. That's why at Grainger, we're here for you, with professional-grade industrial supplies and fast delivery. Call clickgrainger.com or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
Dump truck idling in my house.
We spend a lot of time in graveyards, cemeteries, mausoleums, and cathedrals. You ever get sick of it? Me neither. But just for kicks, let's find some graves outside of our normal haunting grounds. In Devon, England, there is a grave. Not in a graveyard, but in an intersection on the side of the road. This is the grave of Kitty J. Much like the grass that blankets it, a lot of folklore has grown out of Jay's grave. But the crux of the story is that a woman named Anne J., or Betty Kay, committed suicide by hanging in the late 18th century. Because suicide was considered a sin, she was denied a Christian burial in the consecrated churchyards, so she was buried instead here at a crossroads. Travelers who drive along this road at night have claimed to see a ghostly figure in their headlights as they pass by Jay's grave. In the mountains outside of Sagada in the Philippines is a curious sight: coffins hanging from cliffs. In this unique millennia-old tradition, the dead here are placed inside wooden coffins, but instead of being buried, they are nailed into walls inside caves or high on the cliff facades. This is done to get them closer to their ancestral spirits, high above. This is the London Palladium in England. Over the decades, some of the biggest names in entertainment have performed on this stage. And one of the big names who became closely associated with this stage now rests under it. Bruce Forsyth was an entertainer and presenter whose career spanned some 70 years. He's remembered as host of Sunday Night at the Palladium and a number of game shows. After his death, he was cremated, his ashes entombed underneath the stage here at the London Palladium, eternally resting enveloped in the sounds of music, laughter, and dancing. Exactly where he would want to be. In Volume 1 of our Strange and Unusual Tales, we shared with you stories of individuals who'd had portions of their cremated remains launched into space. Well, there are more stories of individuals whose remains did not remain earthbound. Clyde Tombaugh was an American astronomer known for discovering Pluto in 1930. After his death in 1997, at age 90, a portion of his ashes was placed in this canister aboard NASA's New Horizons spacecraft and launched into space in 2006. In 2015, New Horizons, with Tombaugh's ashes aboard, executed a close flyby of the very planet, now dwarf planet, that he discovered, Pluto. Since then, New Horizons has continued to travel into deep space at a rate of about 300 million miles per year, and is currently more than 5 billion miles from Earth, making Clyde Tombaugh's the most remote grave in the galaxy, and the human that has traveled further than any other in history, alive or dead. In Volume 1 of our Strange and Unusual Tales, we also introduced you to the Neptune Memorial Reef, the world's first underwater cemetery, a man-made reef and columbarium beneath the waters of the Atlantic. We also mentioned how famed chef Julian had chosen the Neptune Memorial Reef as her final destination. Well, now, thanks to our friends at Eco Photo Explorers, we can show you Julia Child's underwater grave. Julia Child was a cooking instructor, author, and television personality who rose to fame with her cookbook, Mastering the Art of French Cooking, and subsequent television series, The French Chef. Julia died from kidney failure at age 91. She was cremated, her ashes mixed with cement and molded into this starfish before being laid to rest here on the reef, 40 feet below the surface of the ocean.
I forgot about that part.
Julia loved cooking with fish.
They won't really hatch it off if there's no light.
Welcome to the French Chef. I'm Julia Child. Today we're going to do fish soup and bouillabaisse.
Julia now herself a key ingredient in this bouillabaisse of underwater life and death. We've voyaged into outer space and dived down into the deep blue sea. But there's one remote locale we've yet to reach, Antarctica. If you can believe it, there are a number of graves on this icy continent. The first known individual to be buried in a grave here on Antarctica was a scientist by the name of Nikolai Hansen. In 1899, while part of an expedition here, Nikolai became ill with an intestinal disorder and requested that should he die, he be buried there in Antarctica. And so he was. The frozen ground made for difficult grave digging, so dynamite was used to blast a hole into which Nikolai was interred. Till death do us part. So fast. These nice folks might have something to say about that. we begin our exploration of undying love at the old cemetery in the city of Roermond in the Netherlands. This cemetery was established in the late 18th century with clear religious divides. High walls separate sections for Catholics, Protestants, and Jews. Colonel Jacobus Warnerus Constantinus van Gorkum was a Protestant. His wife, Josephina Carlina Petronella Hubertina van Afferden, was a Catholic. A pairing that would have been quite the scandal in that era. Colonel van Gorkum died in 1880 and was buried on the Protestant side of the wall. But his wife knew that when she died, she could not be buried next to him, as she was a Catholic. Before her death, Josephina came up with an ingenious and endearing solution. She had Jacobus buried right next to the wall on the Protestant side. When she died 8 years later, she was buried directly across the wall from her husband on the Catholic side. Their headstones were made to tower over the wall, a pair of hands reaching out of the headstones and clasped together forever across the wall, linking these two graves into one. It's become known as the grave with the little hands. Proof once more that love can conquer all. This Dutch couple wasn't the only one religion tried to separate after death. We travel now to the Royal Chapel of Dreux in France, the traditional burial place of prominent members of the House of Orleans. It was built in 1816 and is notable for the recumbent effigies of those resting therein. Most curious among them is the story of this man.
shipping. Ships it.
Family held vigil for days, but she succumbed to her illness and her body was placed on a stem sleep. The story that follows is likely the kind of myth that makes for a great ghost story, but isn't rooted in much fact. Regardless of veracity, it's one of those old American paranormal tales that has cemented itself in our culture. The legend states that years after her entombment here, the tomb was opened once again for its next occupant, likely her son Hugh, who died 2 years later. To their horror, the family found next to the door a pile of bones in Julia's burial place. She had been entombed alive, and her attempts to escape had been blocked by the heavy stone door of the tomb. Julia was then reburied alongside her son, but from then on, the door of the tomb would not remain shut. Any attempts to close it would only find it open again later on. The spirit of Julia Laguerre, they said, would not allow the door to be shut, never again wanting to feel trapped in the way she had been. So the door was permanently removed. The mausoleum remains open, with the spirit of Julia to be free. Many of us try and stay close to our dead in thought and spirit. Here in Chapter 8, we try to get a little closer, piercing the veil of earth and concrete that typically separates us from our dead. Florence Irene Ford was just 10 years old when she died from yellow fever. The little girl had been terribly afraid of storms when she was alive. Her grief-stricken mother laid her to rest here in Natchez City Cemetery, Mississippi. She had a casket constructed with a glass window close to her head, and a stairwell leading down to her grave, so that when a storm came, she could descend and comfort little Florence through the window during the storm. In the 1950s, the glass window was covered with a concrete wall to prevent vandalism. To this day, gifts are left to the little girl. Weep not, for in beauty transcendent, the daughter doth shine. Julia Petta is known as the Italian bride. The young woman died in childbirth in 1921 at the age of 29. She was buried in her wedding dress here at Mount Carmel Cemetery in the Chicago area. Years after Julia's death, her mother began having dreams of her daughter telling her that she was still alive. The dreams soon became nightmares, and her mother secured permission to have her daughter exhumed. Julia's coffin had decayed, but when it was opened, onlookers marveled at the state of Julia Petta. Though entombed for 6 years, she appeared almost just as she had on the day of her funeral, with almost no signs of decay. A photo was taken of Julia before she was weeping, which now adorns her. Let's hop on a plane now to the home of Hollywood Graveyard's composer, Maestro Giuseppe Vasco. Among the curious sights you'll see around Europe that are unheard of in the States are catacombs with human remains on display. One of the most famous catacombs in the world is right here in Palermo, on the island of Sicily in Italy. Welcome to the catacombs of the Capuchin monks. As early as the 1500s, monks began to lay their own to rest in catacombs beneath the monastery, part of an ancient cave structure. In doing so, they found that many of them became naturally mummified, almost perfectly preserved. Believing it to be an act of God, instead of burying the remains, they began to place them on display, propped up in niches in the corridor walls. Monks continued the mummification of their own over the centuries, expanding the practice with drying tables, vinegar washings, and even more modern techniques of embalming. From the 17th to the 19th centuries, the site became a popular museum of death, and prominent citizens of Palermo were eventually granted granted access to the catacombs and mummification process for themselves after their deaths. It became something of a status symbol to be preserved for eternity, put on display in the Cappuccini catacombs. Mummies are dressed in their Sunday best, with the wares of their professional trade. And if you can get past the horror of what you're seeing, it's a fascinating snapshot of life as it was centuries ago, presented by the people who literally lived. The very last corpse admitted to the catacombs is also the most famous. On December 6, 1920, young Rosalia Lombardo died from pneumonia. She was not yet dead. The grief-stricken father asked an embalmer to preserve her remains. She was so well preserved that decades later, the grave is still alive. This photo, for example, was taken more than 60 years after her death in 1982. It has become known as the Sleeping Beauty. Adding to little Rosalia's semblance of life is a strange phenomenon that makes her eyes appear to open and close slightly throughout the day. An illusion caused by the fact that her eyes are not fully shut, with light, shadow, temperature, and humidity fluctuations throughout the day facilitating the eerie effect. Another of the most famous catacombs in the world can be found in Paris, France. Down, down, down we go, deep into the city of Paris. Down endless stairways and along endless corridors carved into the rock. The corridors barely follow the you, the air cooling with every step, reaching 90 feet below the surface. Halt! This is fair warning. The catacombs are not for the faint of heart. The catacombs of Paris are an ossuary that hold the remains of some 6 million individuals. By the late 1700s, cemeteries in the city of Paris began to overflow, causing health and safety concerns. The solution was to move the bones from all of central Paris' cemeteries to an abandoned underground quarry dating back to the 15th century. Little by little, these former limestone quarries began to fill up with the bones from all the cemeteries in central Paris. Initially, the bones were stacked haphazardly, but in 1810, the Inspector General of the quarries decided to develop the area for a museum-like atmosphere and stack the bones in geometric and neat patterns, creating bone walls and formations called caves. The catacombs were then opened to the public and have been a popular destination for the curious thrill-seeker ever since. But keep track of where you're going and where you've been, lest you hit a dead end and add your own to the bones and tomb peering. Don't worry, I found my way out. At least, I think. Anyway, the stories in this last chapter run the gamut from head-scratching to heart-warming. It's a cavalcade of the cadaverous, a spectrum of the spooky, a panoply of the paranormal, an odyssey of oddities. Let's just call it a menagerie of the macabre. In 1928, a man was found dead along the side of the road in Sabina, Ohio. He had no identification on him, no way of determining who he was. The man was given the name Eugene by police and taken to Littleton Funeral Home, where he was involved. Eugene's remains were made accessible to public viewing, resting on a couch in a small shed outside the funeral home, in hopes that someone would be able to identify him. His remains remained on display for decades, with no one able to identify him. He became known as Eugene the Sabina Mummy, and over the years it's estimated that over 1 million people came to see him. But poor Eugene, in addition to becoming something of a sideshow attraction, was the subject of adolescent pranks, his body even being stolen and set on a University Park bench. So in 1964 it was decided that he may never be identified, and it was best to finally lay him to rest here in Sabina Cemetery, some 36 years after his death. It's common to have one's ashes scattered after being cremated, but the mode of scattering, well, that could vary significantly. If you're Hunter S. Thompson, author of Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, for example, your mode of scattering came with a bang. At his private funeral in 2005, Hunter's ashes were fired from a cannon atop this tower, accompanied by fireworks, the tunes, Spirit in the Sky. In recent years, the more environmentally conscious among us have moved toward the burgeoning green burial movement, returning to the earth in the most natural way possible. Luke Perry was a major television star in the 90s, playing Dylan McKay on Beverly Hills 90210. And his films Buffy the Vampire Slayer and his final film, Once Upon a Time with Molly. Luke left us far too soon, passing away from a stroke in 2019 at age 52. Luke owned a farm here in Van Lear, Tennessee. It was here that he was laid to rest, buried in an eco-friendly mushroom suit. Embedded in the fibers of the suit are mushroom spores, which slowly break down the body while filtering toxins. The process helps provide nutrients to the soil and avoid contamination to plant life, and allowing the body to return to the earth in the cycle of life. In the old burying ground in Beaufort, North Carolina, is a distinctive wooden tombstone which reads, "Little girl buried in a rum keg." The story of this grave takes us back to the 1700s, when an English family named Slow settled in the colonies. Their young daughter grew up in the colonies, but very much desired to see their homeland of England. The mother expressed her concern about the dangerous voyage, but the father promised he would bring their little girl back home. Tragically, the young girl fell ill and died on the journey home to England. Custom in those days was to have those who died on a ship buried at sea, but Father Slow couldn't bear to part with his little girl and break his promise to bring her home to North Carolina. So, with no other way to preserve her body for the long voyage home, he had her placed in a barrel of rum. The mourning parents then buried her here in the graveyard, still encased in the barrel of rum. To this day, visitors leave coins and other gifts. One of the biggest names in classic English literature is Bronte. Sisters Charlotte, Emily, and Anne wrote Jane Eyre, Wuthering Heights, and The Tenant of Wildfell Hall, respectively. Patriarch Patrick Bronte actually had 6 children. Tragically, all his children and his wife would die young, all before the age of 40. They were all laid to rest here in the family vault at St. Michael and All Angels Churchyard in Haworth. For Anne, who died and was buried in North Yorkshire. The Brontes, all of them exhibited general poor health throughout their lives. Despite being comfortably well off, the family lived downstream from this graveyard surrounding the church. It's been theorized that their drinking water came from springs with contaminated rainwater that had soaked through the graveyard. Long-term exposure to bacteria may have rendered them all more susceptible to the illnesses that claimed them so young. Moral of this story? Don't drink graveyard water. Fans of folklore from the American frontier well know the name Jesse James. And the taphophile contingent of that fandom knows that the grave of Jesse James can be found at Mount Olivet Cemetery in Missouri. But did Jesse James really die by the hand of Robert Ford in 1882 as legend states? Yes, but don't tell that to whomever is buried in this grave in Granbury, Texas. According to this legend, Jesse James faked his death and disappeared off to Texas, where he worked the railroads as J. Frank Dalton, before dying in 1951 at the age of 103, and was really buried here. Post-mortem examinations of Mr. Dalton claimed to show a number of bullet wounds and rope burn scars around his neck, as one might expect to find on the frontier outlaw. The next odd tale is typed out in a letter adhered right to the urn of the story's subject. In July 1992, cremated remains were found scattered in a hedge in front of Marilyn Monroe's crypt at Western Village Memorial Park. The yardman found the ID tag within the ashes, identifying them as people who died in 1989. The ashes were returned to the Chapel of the Pines, where he was cremated, and now rest in the grave. Here's a heartwarming story for you animal lovers. It takes us to Edinburgh, Scotland, and back to the 1800s. Greyfriars Bobby was a terrier owned by a man named John Gray. After his death in 1858, John was laid to rest here in the Greyfriars Kirkyard. The funeral procession to the gravesite was Letty's dog. From that day on, for the next 14 years, the loyal pup stood guard over the grave of his beloved master. Local residents fed the dog and even built him a shelter because he simply refused to leave his master's grave for any extended period of time. The vigil lasted until Greyfriars Bobby's own death in 1872, at which time he too was buried here in the churchyard, not far from his master. This headstone was placed in 1981, and in 2021, a new statue monument was placed adjacent to the grave. And after you visit the dog's grave, head around the corner for a toast to Greyfriars Bobby at the pub that bears his name. Then watch the movie Disney made about Bobby. We approach our final stop on this journey through the strange and unusual as our train pulls into the station at St. Pancras in London. Just off the station is the St. Pancras Old Church, one of the oldest in England. The graveyard surrounding the church is steeped in history, but the most curious sight you'll see here is a tree. At first glance, perhaps a fairly unremarkable looking ash tree, until your eyes fall to the ground and you see a cluster of hundreds of overlapping tombstones radiating outward from the base of the tree. How did this unusual sight come to be? In the 1860s, London was expanding its railway lines, part of which would cut through the eastern portion of the graveyard. A young man named Thomas Hardy, yes, the same Thomas Hardy who would become a renowned author, was tasked with overseeing the careful exhumation and relocation of thousands of graves that would be disturbed by the rail line. After the task was completed, there remained hundreds of old tombstones and the question of what to do with them. The tombstones were eventually placed around the base of this tree in this striking radial ladder, and the tree now bears the name of Thomas Hardy. Over the decades, the tree continued to grow, deforming and enveloping the tombstones as it did. But after more than a century and a half of lighting the curious commodity signal, in 2014, the tree was infected with a fungus. For a tree, it was a death sentence. In following years, the tree slowly decayed until it finally fell in December 2022. It was a great loss, but the curious among us are intrigued to see what the future has in store for this historic site. Until then, rest in peace, the Hardy Tree. You hear that music? That means our time is at an end. I thoroughly enjoyed our evening together. How are you too? But don't worry. I'll be back soon. We'll have more strange and unusual tales to share with you in the graveyard. After I've had a chance to dig. Thanks for watching and stay spooky, my friends. The people who need support to make this performance good are the people of this and other YouTube stations, Fears World Foundation, and generous contributions to viewers like you.
I can tell that she has a great sense of humor, but she hasn't told me the joke yet.
Want a career as a pet psychic? We're not the school for you. Want a career-focused degree that's fast, flexible, and affordable? Apply now at post.edu. Post University.
Welcome to Hollywood Graveyard, where we set out to remember and celebrate the lives of those who lived to entertain us by visiting their final resting places. So Today we're heading back to Inglewood Park Cemetery to find such stars as the Wanda Page, Big Mama Thornton, Lou Gibson, Cleo Moore, and many more. Join us, won't you? One of the very first cemeteries we visited way back in 2017 was Inglewood Park Cemetery. 6 years ago, if you can believe it, that baby-faced kid you saw in the intro cameo hadn't even started going great. We found some big stars here, like Ray Charles, Ella Fitzgerald, Betty Grable, Etta James, and Cesar Romero. But Inglewood is a massive cemetery, and we only skimmed the surface of the stories to be told from these grounds. Inglewood has long been on my radar for a revisit, so we're back today to find some more entertainers and other historical figures that call Inglewood their eternal home. This area has grown since our first visit. Just across the street from the cemetery, you can now see the new SoFi Stadium, home to the LA Rams and Chargers. And you'll also recall that Inglewood is the cemetery you fly over and landing at LAX. We'll begin our tour today just in from the entrance on the right in the Sequoia section. Not far in from the road, we find James J. Jeffries. He was in the late 19th, early 20th centuries, becoming world heavyweight champion in 1899. Jeffries was known for his strength and stamina, able to absorb punishing blows to wear his opponents down. He would retire undefeated in 1905, but come out of retirement as the Great White Hope in 1910 for the original fight of the century to attempt to reclaim the title for Jack Johnson. It would come to be one of the most consequential boxing matches, duking it out for the championship highlighted the tense race relations in Jim Crow America. Jack Johnson defeated Jeffries, the only man to beat him, and was the first black heavyweight champion of the world. A black man defeating a white man did not sit well with many Americans, and after the fight, numerous race riots broke out across the country, leading to multiple deaths, mainly of black people celebrating the champion's victory. There were even some efforts by some cities and states to ban the exhibition of the film of the fight to try and censor Johnson's victory. But for his part, Jim Jeffries was gracious in his defeat and praised Johnson's greatness after the fight. Jeffries would take his skills to the screen as well, in films like One Round Robin. James J. Jeffries died from a heart attack caused by a coronary thrombosis at age 77. Just across the street is the Sunset Mission Mausoleum. Heading into Sanctuary El Sereno, about halfway in on the right, we find the crypt of Richard Berry. He was a musician, a singer and songwriter associated with 50s doo-wop groups like the Flairs and the Robins. His biggest claim to fame is as the composer and original performer of the rock standard Louie Louie. The song would later be famously covered by the Kingsmen, which sparked an FBI investigation into the perceived but non-existent obscenity in the mostly unintelligible lyrics. Louie Louie has since become one of the most recorded songs in rock history. Berry also had a hit in the song Have Love Will Travel. He continued to perform until shortly before his death at age 61 from heart failure. Back out to Sequoia section in front of the mausoleum near the eastern road is the grave of Margaret Booth. She was one of the great film editors in the early days of Hollywood. In an age when cutters, as they were known, were held in little regard, Margaret helped elevate the craft of film editing to drive the narrative and seamlessly flow through shots and scenes. In doing so, she's said to be the first cutter to be referred to as a film editor. Her career began in the silent era, and her best work came in the 1930s for MGM. She was nominated for an Academy Award for editing the 1935 film Mutiny on the Bounty. Later, Margaret would be promoted to supervising editor, overseeing the edits of some of the great films of the age, including The Wizard of Oz, Gigi, and Annie. In 1978, Margaret was given an honorary Academy Award for her exceptional contribution to the art of film editing in the motion picture industry. She lived to be 104. Also buried here in the family plot is Margaret's brother, Elmer Booth. He was an actor during the silent era. He was one of the rising stars of this era, best known for starring in D.W. Griffith's The Musketeers of Pig Alley, considered by many as the first gangster flick. His smooth anti-hero approach to the character, with set the stage for gangsters
Trial
of the
run
next
it.
generation like
Got a
Gagnon
whole
and
bunch of
Robinson.
plexiglass. I just wanted to see
His
if
career was cut short when he died in an
what it's
accident
all about
in
before he tried
1950
for
at
real.
age 32. He was a passenger in a car driven by future director Tom Browning, and the car collided with a train.
It's so cold down here. The coffee from 2 days ago
the
still
great
isn't even
scientist
dry
King
yet.
Cork Melvin. Still in this same section, a little further west, is the grave of actress Lois Hall. Her memorable film roles include as Sister Constance in Dead Again and Tikura in Daughter of the Jungle. She was also known as a leading lady in B-movie westerns like Colorado Ambush. Those who've gone to make numerous television appearances as well, in shows like Cisco Kid and 6 Feet Under. She died from a heart attack and stroke at age 80. Let's cross the street southwest to A plot. Here is the unmarked grave of Fred Kohler. He was considered one of the great heavies in early American film, an actor who played intimidating thugs, brutes, and villains. His career began in the silent era in films like The Iron Horse and Underworld. And he would go on to menace cowboy heroes in silent and sound westerns for decades in close to 150 productions. Fred was just 50 when he died from a heart attack in 1938. Hopping back across Sequoia section to Del Ivy section to the east, near the road, is the grave of Cleo Moore. The sultry starlet of the 50s silver screen was one of the era's many blonde bombshells. She rose to prominence starring in the Congo Bill serial in 1948. In the 50s, she'd be positioned by the studio to be their next big star, to compete with Marilyn Monroe in films like One Girl's Confession.
I'll make it easy for you, gentlemen. I took the money and I'm ready to take the rest for it. So let's go.
Other films include The Other Woman, Women's Prison, and Overexposed. But none could compete with Marilyn, and Cleo found her roles dictated more by her looks than her talent, and gradually diminished. She decided to retire from the screen in 1957. Cleo died in her sleep from a heart attack in 1973. Her birth year here is wrong. She was 48. Her fame was only growing posthumously, Cleo gaining something of a cult following as one of the great B-movie bad girls and pinups of the 50s. Let's hop back in the car and make our way around to Sunny Slope. Heading up said slope, we find the grave of Maceo Verb Brown. He was a composer of popular songs, film music, and theater music in the 20s to the 50s. He wrote music for MGM's first all-talking musical, The Broadway Melody, in 1929. Perhaps his best-known work is the music for the 1952 film Singin' in the Rain, the title track having actually been written in 1929 and was the inspiration for the film.
Singing in the rain, yes, singing in the rain.
And for television, Maceo wrote themes for the shows Hopalong Cassidy and The Millionaire. He died from cancer at age 68, and years later was inducted into the Songwriters Hall of Fame. Just around the corner is a beautiful monument that you've seen in a few of our past videos. Well, it's high time we introduced you to who this statue memorializes. This is the grave of Lillian Lightson. Lillian was an acrobatic circus performer. She was born in Germany into a family of circus performers, and by 1910 made her way to the U.S. to perform. In 1915, she joined Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey Circus, where she became a huge star. She was renowned for her high-flying performances on the rings, becoming known as the Aerial Wonder. She traveled the world performing for over a decade until tragedy struck. While performing in Copenhagen, Denmark, one of her rings snapped, and she fell 20 feet to the ground, landing on her back. She initially insisted she was all right, but 2 days later died from a concussion and complications from the fall. She was 39. Her husband, Alfredo Cardona, a trapeze performer in the circus, was devastated. He had this monument to his beloved Lillian created. Into the monument are carved 2 rings, one of which is broken. The 2 figures are a winged Alfredo embracing his beloved Lillian. Alfredo also rests here. In addition to being a trapeze performer, he'd be Johnny Weissmuller's stunt double in a number of Tarzan films. By 1937, his high-flying career had ended due to an injury, and his marriage to his third wife was falling apart. While in a meeting with their lawyer over a division of property after the divorce, Donor pulled out a gun, shot his wife, then shot himself. He died at the scene at 43. His wife died the next day. He was then buried here alongside his second wife, Lily.
What if there was no galaxy far, far away? Then there was no joy. And they never did assemble. What if every second didn't count? And he never did remember who he was? What if she never did step into the arena? And he didn't see her butts? And she never did let it go? And no one ever did get murdered in this building? Then that would really suck, wouldn't it? But hey, there is a galaxy far, far away, and there is joy, and they did assemble, and every second does count, and he did remember who he was, and she did step into the arena, and he did see more butts, and she did let it go. And best of all, a whole bunch of people did get murdered in this building.
You gotta be freaking kidding me.
And aren't we lucky for that?
Not far from here is a section known as Alton Mesa. In the western corner of the garden, we find the crypt of the Rappin' Granny, real name Vivian Smallwood. She began rapping in the 80s and 90s and was signed to a record label. Years later, she took her talents to America's Got Talent, competing in the 2006 season and making it through several rounds as one of the crowd favorites. Vivian was also an actress, known for playing Nano on Big Bad Beetleborgs and making appearances on shows like Everybody Hates Chris and Parks and Recreation. She lived to be 84. Circling around again to the north, we arrive at the Capistrano Garden Mausoleum. Along the memorial panel to the right, we find Sunshine Sammy, real name Ernest Morrison. He made his film debut as a baby in 1916 when a producer who was in acquaintance with his father asked him to bring baby Ernest to set for a scene they needed to shoot, and thus a career was born. He continued to act prolifically through the silent era, including in 2 real comedies alongside the likes of Harold Lloyd and in the Our Gang series. Sunshine Sammy is believed to be the first African-American actor to sign a long-term contract in Hollywood. He signed on with Hal Roach Studio in 1919 and is considered Hollywood's first black child star. He'd become well known in the 40s as one of the East Side / Dead End kids, playing Screw-Up in more than a dozen films in the series. He retired from the screen in 1944, but made one more appearance on Good Times in 1974. Sunshine Sammy died from cancer at age 76. Not far from Sammy is the grave of LaWanda Page, real name Alberta Peel. Dubbed the Black Queen of Comedy, she's fondly remembered by fans of the 70s sitcom Sanford and Son as the hilarious Aunt Esther.
Well, I'm sure not glad to see you, at least, Laughing Jake. Oh, like you shut up, Esther. You just keep sucking on that sucker. And when I pull your chain, you pop.
LaWanda was also known for her stand-up and comedy albums, including The Gold Star. Other television appearances include on Martin and Starsky and Hutch, and her films include Shakes the Clown and Friday. LaWanda died from a heart attack at age 81. Continuing into this courtyard, we find T-Bone Walker, whose plaque seems to have gone missing. T-Bone ranks among the great guitarists of all time. He's particularly known as an innovator of jump blues and electric blues sounds.
They call it Starry Monday.
He played with many of the great jazz and blues artists of the era, touring and recording extensively. His 1969 album, Good Feeling, would win him a Grammy. Walker was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 1987. He writes that T-Bone Walker was the first to make a guitar wail, cry out, and buckle under the weight of his emotion. T-Bone Walker died from pneumonia following a stroke in 1975 at the age of 64. I'm not sure what happened to his marker. There used to be one here, as this photo shows. Hopefully it will be replaced soon. Just east of here is the Mausoleum of the Golden West. When When you visit, be sure to take a moment to soak in all the colorful light from the stained glass in the mausoleum. Turned tragic just 2 months later when Byrne was found dead in their home with a gunshot wound to his head. He was 42. His death was ruled a suicide with a note found nearby, but doubts persist to this day about the official finding, with some speculating that the suicide had been staged, that he had been shot and killed by his common-law wife, who the very next day committed suicide by jumping from a boat on the way to San Francisco. Jean Harlow could not speak of Byrne's death for the remainder of her life. Back out to the grounds, the section just in front of the mausoleum is Magnolia. Here is the grave of Hoot Gibson, beloved cowboy of the world. He was another of early Hollywood's pioneering cowboy heroes. He began appearing in silent westerns as early as 1910. By the 20s, he was second only to Tom Mix as box office draw for western stars. He was particularly popular amongst children who idolized Hoot as their matinee hero. He successfully transitioned into the top, and by the 50s, Hoot had appeared in more than 200 films. He was also a champion rodeo performer and appeared in his own comics in the 50s. Hoot would be inducted into both the Western Performers and the National Cowboy and Western Heritage Halls of Fame. He died from cancer at age 70. Just south is the historic Inglewood Mausoleum. Built around 1911, it was the first community mausoleum constructed in California. It too features beautiful, colorful stained glass, snapshots of California landscapes. Like other mausoleums in the area, this one is usually kept locked, but if you'd like to visit, just ask and they'll let you in. There are a couple of famous folks from yesteryear in these quiet halls. Just in from the entrance on the left is Samuel Hines. As an actor, he was very busy in the 30s and 40s, appearing in over 200 films. But he didn't start acting until he was in his 50s. Perhaps his best-known role is that of Pa Bailey in the beloved classic It's a Wonderful Life. Other films include You Can't Take It With You and Son of Dracula. Samuel died from pneumonia at age 73. Back toward the entrance, then right, let's head down near the end of this corridor, where on the left we find the crypt of Thomas Lincoln Talley. He was one of the very early pioneers of the movie business in Los Angeles. In 1902, he opened the very first movie theater in LA, called the Electric Theater. In 1917, he co-founded First National Pictures, which began as an association of theater owners, but expanded into a motion picture production company. First National would sign Mary Pickford and Charlie Chaplin to the first $1 million deals in movie history. The company was eventually acquired by Warner Brothers. Talley lived to be 84. Let's say goodbye to this beautiful mausoleum for now and head back out to the grounds. There are a couple of stars here you'll recognize from our Disney special, like Tiny Klein. The diminutive performer began her career as a circus performer. In 1961, Walt began to look for a performer to wow crowds at Disneyland as Tinkerbell, flying over the castle. At the age of 70, Tiny Klein was cast in the role of Tinkerbell, flying over crowds on a wire from Sleeping Beauty's castle to the Matterhorn during the fireworks shows at night. She played the role until her death in 1964. The easternmost section in the cemetery is Mignonette. Near the road is the grave of Myrtle Stedman. The actress began appearing in films as early as 1910 and would become a leading lady in the Selig Studio Western and action films. Moviegoers fell in love with her as the girl with the pearly eyes. Her star continued to rise into the 20s in films like Reckless Youth and The Famous Mrs. Fair. Into the talkies, her roles were generally more supportive, and as happened to so many, her career declined. She was just 52 when she died from a heart attack. Near the southern end of this section is one of the few upright monuments in Mignonette, an angel marking the Fazenda family plot. Behind this statue is the grave of Louise Fazenda. She was one of the most popular comedians of the silent era. Louise began appearing in two reel comedies in 1913, and soon was a key player in Mack Sennett's Keystone comedies. She was known particularly as a character actress, her most famous creation being a country bumpkin with multiple pigtails. In the 20s, she made films like The Bat and The Galloping Fish, and made a smooth transition into the talkies, parlaying her knack for character work in films like Tilly's Punctured Romance and Alice in Wonderland. By the end of her career in 1939, she had amassed nearly 300 credits to her name. And if you've ever visited Hollywood Forever Cemetery, this fountain will be familiar to you. It's known as Morning, Noon, and Night. It was created in 1928 for the opening of the Columbarium Rotunda. The fountain features 3 nymphs. The model for the nymphs was none other than Louise Fazenda. She died from a cerebral hemorrhage at age 66. Proceeding southwest, we avoid smashing into a backhoe and reach Pinecrest section on the left. In our previous tour here, we visited the legendary Sugar Ray Robinson. Well, not far from Sugar Ray is a noted musician named Floyd Dixon. He was a rhythm and blues pianist and singer who gained popularity in the 50s. His biggest hit in this era was the 1955 track, Hey Bartender.
I said, hey, bartender, hey, man, over here.
The talented piano player would share the stage with greats like B.B. King and Ray Charles, even coaching Ray Charles on his vocals. In 1996, he released what is perhaps his most acclaimed album, Wake Up and Live. Floyd died from kidney failure at age 77. Our journey across these sprawling grounds takes us now to the western edge of the cemetery, Centinela section. Here lies Roy Glenn. A popular character actor known for his deep voice, Roy made numerous appearances in radio, film, and television beginning in the 1930s. One of his best-known film roles was as Mr. Prentice, the father of Sidney Poitier's character, in the 1967 film Guess Who's Coming to Dinner. Other films include Porgy and Bess, Carmen Jones, and his final appearance in Escape from the Planet of the Apes. He made numerous television appearances as well, including on the Jack Benny program and the Amos and Andy show. Roy died from a heart attack at age 56. The next section south is M-Plot. This one takes us all the way to the western fence. Here we find the grave of Big Mama Thornton. She was a blues and R&B singer and songwriter in the 50s. She was the first to record Hound Dog, which was written for her, and would become her biggest hit, spending 7 weeks at #1 on the R&B charts. Years before Elvis Presley recorded it.
You ain't nothing but a hound. There's no ground, no.
Big Mama also wrote and recorded the song Ball and Chain. She continued to perform into the 1980s, but heavy drinking took a toll on her health. She was found dead at age 57 from heart and liver disorders. In 1984, she was inducted into the Blues Hall of Fame. She was also a featured character in the 2022 biopic about Elvis. Southeast from here is Palm Plot, and another one from our Disney special. Here lies Lucille Laverne. She rose to prominence on the American stage, including in the hit play Sun Up, becoming one of the most acclaimed actresses of her day. She appeared in more than 40 films as well, like A Tale of Two Cities, but audiences today perhaps know her best for her voice work at Disney. She voiced the Old Witch in the silly symphony Babes in the Woods, and in a similar vein, provided the voice for the evil queen in Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Lucille died from cancer at age 72. A few sections east of here are the Garden of Peace mausoleums. This is where Billy Preston is entombed. He was a versatile keyboardist, singer, and songwriter, performing in a wide range of genres from rock to soul and gospel. He backed some
Introducing the new Ego Power Plus snowblower, a powerful compact snowblower from the #1
The Joe Rogan Experience.
Train by day, Joe Rogan podcast by night, all day.
Good to see you, my friend.
Good to be seen. Thank you. Good to see
We
you.
were supposed to be doing the end of the year, but unfortunately, you got caught with the cooties.
I did, and
what'd you get?
I can officially announce that the end of 2024 is right now.
Well,
Can't wait for that.
Calendar's all bullshit anyway. It's supposed to be on that old one. 13 months.
There you go.
So what happened? What'd you catch?
Well, I thought I had bronchitis. Everybody in the house had it. We go to CrossFit, and they all had it. I go to CrossFit Jack's, and my trainer's Megan Russell there, and she's going, you might want to take it easy a little bit. Of course, I'm smoking cigarettes. I got bronchitis. I go to a clinic. They give me some drugs. Yeah, you got bronchitis. Go home. A couple days later, I'm sleeping in my chair. My wife has one of those little oxygen monitor things you put on your finger. She wakes me up and goes, all right, let's go. Well, what do you mean, let's go? Oxygen levels. You go to the hospital. What? I'm just sitting here taking a nap. No, you're going to the hospital. So I said, okay. So we get this late at night. We go to St. Vincent's Clinic. Go in. It's late. And sitting there waiting for the doctor. Arian F. Sherry. Great guy, turns out. He comes in and looks at